Born in Lima, Peru, Milagros de la Torre has been working with various conceptual photographic media since 1991. She studied communication sciences at the University of Lima and received a BA in photographic arts from the London College of Printing. Her photographs emerged from a rigorous research process, critical argumentation of the photographic apparatus, and an intensely personal background. By means of a sober and austere focus, her images often project an eerie beauty and visual seduction that contrasts with a painful subject matter. Inhabited by criminal worlds, red-face portrait negatives, everyday objects with intense psychological charge, troubling interior dialogues, apparently innocent clothing, omitted presences, canceled gazes, these works offer analysis of human actions during fraught situations through a distinctive photographic language. Milagros de la Torre's work has been exhibited broadly and is in part of major museum collections. Her first solo exhibition, consisting of works from her series Under the Black Sun and curated by Robert Del Pier, was presented at the Palais de Tokyo Centre National de la Photographie in Paris. In 2012, the American Society here in New York City mounted a solo exhibition of her work entitled Observe, and it was curated by Edward Sullivan. And the Museo de Arte de Lima honored her with a mid-year retrospective exhibition. Other publications include Trouble de la Vue and the 20-year retrospective Photographs 1991 through 2011, and you can purchase that very copy tonight with an autograph from Milagros right after this evening's lecture. It's going to be held in the school gallery. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Milagros and welcome her to ICP. Thank you so much.
Firstly, I would like to thank Phil and Suzanne for the invitation to be part of the lecture series here at ICP, and to ICP, which has been almost a second home in New York. Thank you all for coming tonight. I will quickly permit myself to say hello to friends watching online in the Southern American Hemisphere, Argentina, Chile, and Peru. Most probably, the events that occurred during the first 18 years in an individual's life become the most significant as to where their decisions and life goals will lie later. My childhood was marked by the circumstances witnessed by certain of us who grew up during the 70s and 80s in Peru, amid the political and economical upheavals of military coups and dictatorship in Latin America, and later, the violent threat of Maoist terrorist group, The Shining Path. Nothing out of the ordinary. Human beings tend to get accustomed to all types of conditions, even if that condition is living cordially with violence. My father followed the family tradition and joined the military. He had been singled out as a brilliant strategist against criminality and terrorism. He was brought to Washington, D.C. to be trained and became the youngest general in the history of Peru. Later, he was appointed the chief of state for the fight against terrorism, jefe de Estado Mayor de la lucha contra subversiva. Both of my grandparents also wore the military uniform. My mother, on the other hand, was a professor on world and Peruvian history. So in all, a very, very disciplined upbringing. Secret reunions in the middle of the night at our home, the lights of police cars just outside, the personal protection training, the curfews, the limited electricity hours, the daily changing of the route to school, and the imminent possibility of violence were every day's routine. Without a doubt, those early years are ingrained in a manner that influences the person we come to be. It's inevitable that experiences, both personal and professional, make my work discuss certain issues in certain ways. Since an early age, I was interested in photographs. I'd like finding details that others would not have noticed, as when a button was missing out of an uncle's jacket while posing for a family portrait, or when someone in a group photograph would have an uncomfortable expression despite being smiling, or when tables for a celebration would be arranged in such a manner that it will appear well in the photograph. I have been working with the photographic medium since 1991. My work has been characterized by a detailed research process in the examination of violence, its effects, and residual traumas. These residual effects have served as an anthropological foundation for my artistic production. I perceive the photographic medium as a thinking instigator with liberating potential. Since early in my career, I distanced myself from the photojournalistic approach, which was the only valid norm in those days, and looked for influences in conceptual image making. Reason why I had to leave Peru in search of education, cultural exposure, and critical thinking. My intent has always been the proposal of implied signs within the image, with the hope that the spectator would exercise and project his or her own analysis and paradigms. I prefer to propose a reading rather than a first impression. Photography is a space with the capacity to evoke and generate thought, a medium, as any other in the fine arts, where its relation to the referent, its technical methodology, and ways of seeing refer me inevitably to the philosophical. The, quotations, real photograph is the space located between the mind of the viewer and the proposed image. By now, we have realized that a photograph was never a trustworthy document, but an interpretation. That it never was about what we were observing on it, but it was about our reaction and response to its stimuli. That an image has to be decoded. I've always perceived my work as intimate. I'd like to think that articulating my language, I use a contained and subtle vocabulary where hopefully no element is unnecessary, and that ideally generates a response. I find it important to propose a certain complicity between the viewer and the work. Formal and aesthetic decisions along its conceptual outline are always considered. Simplicity is difficult to achieve, and not everyone is attracted by it. The fact that the images have been photographed and treated in a certain manner, that their format has a relation to the human body and the distance the spectator experiences while seeing them, that they are printed on a specific paper or surface in black and white or a tonal treatment of color, that they are part of a series or just a one-piece work, that they always reference a historical photographic fact and a specific technique are considerations that are a conscious component of the work. The image and its conceptual potentiality still intrigues me after more than 20 years. I believe photography has a privileged rank as we tend to move away from the text and towards the technical image. This globalized common language has the capacity for igniting thought process and imagination more than ever before. It lures us by revealing social and political problematics, but also by focusing on the personal, private concerns of the individual. We are experiencing a time of the hyper-documented world. It would seem that we are in a threshold where the image will have to face, sooner or later, a sort of alteration towards the post-photographic, towards the no image, towards just the, quotes, idea of photography. For now, since it's the closest we'll ever be to a mirrored reflection of ourselves, we should spare no opportunity to exchange glances with the looking glass. I have chosen a few series of work to show you today. I'll start with Under the Black Sun. The series is based on the rudimentary technique of street photographers in Cusco, also known as minuteros, who take the picture directly on photographic paper using a box camera, and in that manner, economizing on material and producing immediate results. The exposed paper is developed inside the camera with the aid of recycled sleeves and chemicals stored inside. Now, this is a camera that it's a homemade camera obscura, and you would have the recycled sleeves of an old jacket be put into the box. As the paper negative is removed to dry, a layer of mercurochrome or merbromine, which is the medicine we normally use for cuts, it's a red liquid, is automatically applied to the skin of the subject. This negative image with red is then rephotographed in order to produce a positive or the common ID or passport photograph. The innocent retouching lightens the skin of the subject, producing not only a, quotes, racial improvement, but also an aesthetic, economic, cultural one in the idealized belief of colonial origin, that a person with fair skin intrinsically represents all of these qualities. These ideas are questioned in Under the Black Sun, as the process is suspended in the middle and resolved at the negative stage, with the red veil applied medicine still covering the face of the subject. And I have some photographs. So basically what I did was to observe the technique of the photographers and appropriate the space and their clients. I would I would reside in Cusco on and off and take the photographs. Obviously, I didn't have that camera, that marvelous camera, homemade box camera. So I had to go back to Lima to develop my negatives and paint the red on the faces. Everybody was welcome to take their photographs, and because I couldn't give immediate results, I would offer them a Polaroid image. That's the red. Here you can see in the background the Cusco, the typical Cusco walls with the stones. And what you see appears as a white, well, as a black in the negative now. It used to be the sheet of my bed in the hotel. So I would just go to the street and hang the sheet, and whoever wanted to pass by and have their photograph taken would do. And these were two policemen. It all stays in the family. It's a project based on a defective photographic technique the one where an unsynchronized flash does not illuminate the whole of the image because of its selective and restrictive lighting effect, which in turn results in a partially exposed negative, with the half of the portraits covered in a shadow that increases to complete darkness. So this is where I recycled some ID photographs from my family and rephotographed them with this unsynchronized flash. An apparently inoffensive approach to the conventional family portrait, referencing complexities inherent in every human being, despite them being parents or kids or grandparents. So that's my father and grandfather, and my father and mother. And that's the piece we showed at America Society. The Lost Steps. This series of 15 photographs was taken at the archives of the Palace of Justice in Lima, Peru. Here, I would like to quote Didi Uberman, who says, quotes, "We take objects as neutral, insignificant, without consequence, which is precisely why they merit all of our attention." Close quotes. Images of supposedly everyday objects, a fork, a skirt, but objects with a dense weight to them, since they were presented as evidence in trials for criminal and terrorist acts, crimes of passion, and other felonies. Their innocent origin counteracts with their incriminatory testimonies. The photographs reference a process common in the 19th century when the development of the optical lens was not as advanced and did not entirely cover the format of the photographic image. This technical limitation creates a dark aura around the photograph object and gives it a limited depth of field as to only concentrate our attention to one single detail in focus. It confers on the image a dark halo which alludes to the obscure side of human nature, to the psychological intent and traces of the prosecuted. The title, The Lost Steps, is taken from the name given in 1912 to a hallway of the courthouse in Lima, which led from the sunlit, majestic facade to the somber back of the building, where normally the prosecuted would await for their hearing time. It was of general belief that if one walked the Lost Steps hallway, one should expect imminent condemnation. Many intertwining factors were present in the series conception. Once I was given permission and access to the archive, which was not as evident as one would imagine, I met the chief of the archive, Señor Guzmán, who had a passionate background knowledge for every object. His memory served as a first catalyst. He had learned all the details of the cases since he had to bring and present the evidence from the archive and wait in the back room until the judge would ask him to bring them up front to the main courtroom. Another interesting fact was that this was not a cataloged, ordered, ticketed archive. This was a cluttered mix of objects with no certain identification. Nonetheless, he would know exactly where everything was. One would name the case and he would find the object in question. I was relying on his memory, and he was astonished that someone or anyone would care for his work. Improvising a photographic studio in the archive, we worked for several days, recounting and trying to find explanation to the cases. It was then when I decided to use text under each image, a restrained type of text used by law enforcement professionals. This added an extra layer of interpretation to the work, since we could be thinking that we're just looking at just a fork instead of a chemical test to recognize cocaine chlorhydrate made in a clandestine laboratory. Now let's have a look at these objects of guilt. So this is bullets, confiscated ammunition, an incriminating love letter written by a prostitute to her lover. It's in Spanish, so I'll just translate quickly. It says, he says, I love you, and I know that you love me despite my terrible guilt, my terrible sins. But it was because of this letter that her landlady could prove that she was working the way she worked, and she had a proof to evict her. She says, "Te amo, Elvis. I love you, Elvis." And it had a small momentum. It had a little bag full of earth next to it. This is an improvised knife made from a prison bed frame. You can see the small hole there is for the string. One can just imagine how this person would make the handle and, to be able to carry it. Skirt worn by Marita Alpaca when she was thrown by her lover from the 8th floor of the Sheraton Hotel in Lima. She was found to be pregnant at the autopsy. Now, this was a typical case of the beautiful, humble girl who comes to the capital, and the rich industrial man who falls in love with her, or not. This was a case that was really important in the imagination at the time. Fake police ID used by terrorists. So actually that person there is a terrorist. And this is the badge that we have in Peru. Rudimentary weapon made from broken bottle and paper. So you would just put your hand like that and just frighten every passerby with the broken glass. Crudely fabricated knife confiscated as evidence. Shirt of journalist murder in the Uchurajay massacre in Ayacucho. This was the first time that we realized that we had a terrorist group working in the highlands in Peru. Crowbar, tool used to force entry. This is the police identification mask of criminal known as Loco Perochena. It was after they did this mask, thank you, because there wasn't any photograph of the criminal, so they found finally one and tried to do a 3D mask out of his face, so anybody who could see him and identify him. Finally, he got caught. And here is the chemical test to identify cocaine chlorhydrate produced in a clandestine laboratory. Handgun, incriminating evidence of murder. And these are the belts used by psychologist Mario Poggi to strangle a rapist during police interrogation. Again, another case who was well known for the psychic of Lima or Peruvian society. Armored is a work comprised of 5 photographs which present in the established mode of a three-quarter portrait, which is believed to be our best angle when having a photo session. It presents the historical evolution, starting from the 1920s to 2000, of different design qualities and physical characteristics of armored vehicles, a common means of transportation seen in the streets of Mexico City. The small format images printed small in a larger photographic paper are the size of the width of the human face and are presented on a warm tone texture paper in order to attract the viewer. The intimate photographic prints bring the viewer physically close to observe every single detail. They were taken in large format 4.5-inch negatives to be able to have a broad rendering and start a sort of observation game similar to the 7 differences. I don't know if you know about this game when you were supposed to have to identify subtle difference in lookalike drawings. We used to have this in magazines or newspapers, that you had to look at the difference and find them. This physical closeness generates a more pleasing relationship than the one normally formed when encountering one of these vehicles on the street, where the first reaction provoked by the high caliber weapons of the people driving them is simply to get out of the way. These encyclopedic images promote a change in that perception of danger. The piece comments on implicit urban aggression and how it has been translated into creative design and engineering in the cityscape of any metropolis. So that's the piece altogether. So one can go from one to the next, just finding the images, the differences between them, the technical images. Censored was 2000, was researched in the University of Salamanca's library in Spain, concentrating its attention on books dating from the 15th to the 17th century, which were obliterated and repressed by the Spanish Inquisition. Images of subtle colors and a level of subdued hostility, the elegant beige of the cotton handmade paper contrasts with intense black of the censored passages. From a distance, they could be mistaken for expressionist paintings, but a closer examination reveals almost undecipherable texts effaced by various techniques. Tension arises when the viewer perceives behind this apparent beauty the bellicosity implicit in the images, which stand as witnesses to the suppression of ideas by the powers of authority. Recently, a friend told me he had looked up some of the passages that were hidden. And strange enough, there wasn't anything we would find shocking, even at the time. They talked about humankind's freedom of thought, which was probably extremely dangerous for the church then. Another detail which I found interesting is that the inquisitor signed his name next to the author of the book on the front page, in a way making a second version of the work. So you can see different techniques. This one on the right side had a piece of paper glued first on top of the passages, on top of the paragraphs, and then some ink was poured. Through time, the paper started cracking, and that's how we can see through that black blotch. On the other side is just simply, I find a beautiful graphic drawing, the brown one. This is how I print them. And this is line by line. Now, this is Erasmus de Rotterdam, who was the bestseller of the times. I think it inspired them to have an artistic touch. This is the glue that has been worn out. And then this incredible patience to do the line by line, or just cover the whole page. That's a view of the installation in Museu Niemeyer in Brazil. Untitled The Disappeared. The large format triptych, entitled The Disappeared, assembles 3 interrelated images which present a limited use of dark brown and green tones and exposes garments in deterioration. Seen in unison, they seem to form geographical representations or maps that, seen from a distance, propose the delimitation of large areas of vegetation and earth, as in a mappamundi or an atlas. Almost citing a crime scene, the body is abstract and denotes physical fragility. It suggests the phenomenon of forced disappearances suffered during Latin American dictatorships that today are still current and relevant in troubled nations worldwide. Bleus. Bleus is an artist book, a collaboration between a very well-known writer, Cuban writer, José Manuel Prieto, and also a very well-known designer, Pierre Charpin, and Olivier Andreotti as the graphic design, and I had my photographs. It was published by Toluca Edition in Paris in 2002. Bleus, it's a project that draws its emotional and photographic force from the use of extreme close-up images, in which it is difficult at first to distinguish what is being framed. It is only through the title of the series, Bleus, bruises in French, that the small format photographs are recognized to be contusions on the skin. In Bleus, an inversion of the representation is carried out. The trace of pain is transformed by photography into a pleasing and subtly colorful landscape, which generates tensions between the familiar and the unexpected, between violence and beauty, when appearances tend to deceive. So it's just 5 photographs in the book. That's the book in that pink, soft pink case. Fears. It's a work based on a survey carried out among residents of Mexico City, and for the first time a project created without the intervention of the camera. It focuses on the interior dialogues we all experiment, on the words we say to ourselves, on unspoken thoughts and anxieties. The pieces are presented as rectangular monochromes of dark brown, with a hint of red, which is the first color we see when we close our eyes. Also, formatted and sized, reflecting the peripheral vision field. These monochromes symbolize the mental space. The texts at the bottom are almost imperceptible unless the viewer moves up close to read them. This close-up personal movement creates an intimate relationship between the feelings of the fear communicated by the texts, the viewer's recognition of their own fears, and their mirror-like reflections on the monochrome. So this is that a stray bullet hits me. I interviewed many people, and the fears that became the most common and had a common denominator were the ones that were used. And the series has 10 pieces. That they rob me coming out of the ATM and kidnap me until they empty my account. That was a fairly common one. That they kidnap my son, torture him, or kill him. That they come in to rob the house and harm my family. That I get into a taxi and I'm taken somewhere else. And that's how the person would get us close, and you could actually look at your face as if it was a mirror because of the black background and because of the reflection of the glass in front. When we exposed this series for the first time, and it says Milagros de la Torre, photography, it was very strange because everybody would come in and they would just see these rectangles, these dark blotches. And title, Helmets. It's the large format piece is essentially a still life study of objects not usually depicted by the genre, reflecting the encounter between tone, color, and black and white photographs. It's a work about form, color, contrast, and content, about protective design. That's a complete piece. Dactylar is, I started working on this in 2004 and still ongoing. It's about the idea of the hand and as an instrument that leaves prints, not only as physical realities, but also as psychological marks. And this is the time that I came, I had to do my papers coming into the US, and that's how they do your fingerprints. But now they have decided also to include the whole of the hand because it has been found out that every 10 million people, there's somebody else who has your same fingerprints. So, because they do have these archives of fingerprints now, they have realized that, and now you're supposed to have your hand as well. Bulletproof. The series is comprised of representations of apparently innocent, unsuspecting everyday pieces of clothing, suspended in a vacant white space and depicted in very high detail. These well-crafted garments conceal the real purpose, to protect the wearer from the attack by firearms. Emblematic of our times, characterized by increasing militarization and violence, new habits of consumption are being rapidly assimilated. Not only used by politicians or the rich and famous, armored clothing is being widely adopted by ordinary citizens in crime-afflicted nations worldwide. Bulletproof includes 11 images of different pieces of clothing designed for different genders, styles, and age groups. Each image is life-sized and printed on cotton paper with a texture similar to that of the fabrics used in their manufacture. Oh, this is the denim for the more youthful clientele. This is the guayabera, which was made of the most beautiful linen you can imagine. But nonetheless, you can see the weight of the vest inside of it. Or just a regular jacket, unassuming. There is a, in the labels, you find that there are different types of protection. And you would have platinum for very strong protections, for high caliber arms and professional guns. Then you would have silver and gold with a lesser protection, silver being the most light of them, and just made for knives or for one-to-one fighting. And this is a lady's jacket. A lady's light leather jacket. Or a military style, again for the more young. Lady's suede jacket. Or just a simple t-shirt, white t-shirt. Nonetheless, it's a platinum. And you can just see there is a small zipper to the side that you open up and then take out the plates when the t-shirt needs to be dry cleaned or washed in the machine. I would like to finish by reading a very significant quote from Roland Barthes. Ultimately, photography is subversive not when it frightens, repels, or even stigmatizes, but when it is pensive, when it thinks. Thank you very much.